Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Very good. I would like to visit with our audience today about Korea. It's been in the news more so than a few months ago, but continuously they're talking about dealing with Korea. And Trump's getting a little anxious. He's getting a little nervous. Pence is over there in South Korea stirring up a little trouble. And they're talking about kinetic military action against North Korea. You know, it's an interesting word, kinetic. It's not usually used with military when there's military action. You know, it is kinetic. But the reason they use this, I assume, is the fact that they're sick and tired of too much patience. The era of patience has ended, is what has been told us by the Vice President and others. They're sick and tired of waiting around for UN to do exactly as we tell them. So therefore, it is ending, which means we're not going to play games with sanctions. So if we didn't have the last few weeks, or matter of fact, last week to look at, we'd say, well, this is just back and forth. But twice now, Trump has expressed himself militarily, you know, both in Syria as well as in Afghanistan, and he spent a couple bucks on, it wasn't on 4th of July type of explosions either, big bombs and this sort of thing. But it's more threats, more intimidations, and they have, their excuse is, well, the country's destabilized, and it's somebody's provoked all this. And of course, they say it's President. We don't like him. He's a bad guy. So therefore, it's our obligation. But you know, there's times when we've thrown out accusations for that region. It's all China's fault. But the one thing our government never does is they never look to themselves as possibly having a flawed foreign policy that just may be contributing to the provocatives and the destabilization. So I think it's this problem is not going to be solved very easily unless we do look more strategically with our foreign policy.
You know, it's interesting, the statement by Pence, the era of strategic patience is over. And I think he followed up by saying, you know, they've been pursuing this nuclear weapon for a couple of decades now, you know, and they're still doing it. In a way, that would actually suggest that the opposite should be true, that things have gone on this long, they've gone on forever, nothing really that much has happened, not such a big deal. Why all of a sudden is the era of patience over?
Yeah, when this first came up, it was approximately 25 years ago, and it's back and forth, and nothing has come up from it. And nobody's saying, you know, that he has a nuke. He keeps working on it, but about everything he touches fizzles. You know, every time he has a test, and he has this grand explanation, all the praise come out, and then puffs over, and nothing happens. And, of course, I think he would like to have a nuke. You know, I would think that he would argue the case that he's being provoked by outsiders. You know, when the USS Vinson goes sailing over there to the borders of North Korea, what should they think about? This idea that Trump will get China to fight this battle for him, I think the Chinese are diplomatic in a way of saying, yes, 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 but I don't think they have any intention on being the individual who's going to participate in the overthrow of this government.
And it is a good point you make, because this was brought up in our symposium recently that we had down here in Lake Jackson. And Phil Giraldi, our friend, the former CIA officer, there was a very interesting question that came from the audience. Do you really believe that North Korea has nuclear weapons? It's assumed that they have it. And Phil said, you know, there are a lot of people that he knows in the intelligence community that don't believe it. Their tests thus far have not been up to the megaton level that would signify a nuclear launch or a nuclear weapon being tested. So there is a lot of doubt. Maybe it's bluster. Maybe bluster, you know, favors both sides. He wants to pretend that he's got it so he won't be attacked. And the U.S. wants to pretend that he's got it so we can have a big buildup and spend a bunch of money on weapons.
Yeah, and I guess when they use a few weapons here and there, they have to replace them at a higher cost than ever before. And there are certain groups in our country that sort of enjoy that thing, of building these weapons and keeping these hot spots going. But the big danger is it's getting out of hand. We've been in Korea for a long time now. Separating ourselves a little bit from the immediate conflict, the potential military conflict, is what has this been a benefit to? How has our president's helped? It's cost us a few bucks to be there, but it seems like they're either the people who perpetuate this policy. It's not Trump. He's been there a month or two, and yet he's just falling in line, doing what we've been doing, maybe a little bit more so. But we've been doing this all this time, and it's almost like to keep it unstable. I mean, if we keep doing this, the instability is the fact that we have promised, the South Koreans that we're going to take care of you, we're going to provide your weaponry, we're going to provide your indirect subsidies, we're going to take care of you, and we're going to make sure that North Korea is held in check. And don't ever talk to them. Don't ever have an open door policy. Don't ever believe there's a little bit of trade to go on. Don't want the families trading back and forth. We need an enemy, and for that part of the world, it's North Korea, and they serve as the monster in that area. And so you really have to question, are they really for peace? I mean, we have a treaty, it's mentioned about this treaty, and it's historic and it's ironclad. How is it that a treaty that was made, decades ago should be permitted to be ironclad on a generation of taxpayers and military people right now to go? If it's ironclad, what they're saying is don't even ask Congress. And Trump doesn't ask Congress about his escalation on the military. And if he does something today or tomorrow or next week to show how tough we are, do you think he's going to ask Congress? They're almost irrelevant, on this. And they're, seem to be satisfied with that. Well, if he doesn't ask me, then we don't have to get on. We don't have to make a decision.
Yeah, exactly. And Doug Bandow, who we like, he writes a lot about the Korea situation. He has a piece out recently, and he makes, I think, a couple of very good points. The first one is, this is not the world of the 1950s anymore, where superpowers are clashing over these strong ideologies, yet people are still mired in that kind of thought process. The other thing that he points out is that the U.S. subsidizes a very wealthy country. And I think, they want middle America to get on board and wave the flag, and we've got to take care of these commies in North Korea. But they should realize, as they see their jobs disappearing and their standard of living going down, that they are subsidizing a very wealthy South Korea. They're picking up the tab for a great amount of South Korea's military defense, and allows them to spend a lot more money on other things. And this is nearly $1 billion a year that the Americans are spending over there. The question is why? And what do they do? Since they know that we have them covered, the South Korean governments have been very belligerent. They don't have any incentive to try to make a deal because they've got big Uncle Sam behind them.
Well, I thought China made a reasonable suggestion that was dismissed by our government within seconds, minutes. We don't want to do anything to even talk about it. And the suggestion by the Chinese, who are much closer to North Korean government, said, look, why don't you as an Americans just move back? Why do you have to have war games constantly, bigger and better every year, and go right up to the DMZ and say, warning, this is how powerful we are? And he says, if you backed off, there's just a pretty good chance that that one might give up even trying to have a nuclear weapon. It might be easy for him to do that since he doesn't have one. I don't believe he has one, but I'm sure he would be glad to have one. But they can't even turn that. They don't even have enough wealth to have street lights. Yeah. They don't have lights at nighttime, and they can't even shoot a missile without it exploding on takeoff. So. But I just don't understand the obsession with finding these enemies and trying to provoke them. It's a perfect setup for an accident happening or a false flag to happen. Maybe that one is a little goofy. That's a good reason why we shouldn't be doing this, because he's totally unpredictable. And it could be that an incident could occur and they blame it on him, and that'll give our government even greater excuse to be more kinetic with our military and do a lot more bombing than we did in the last week.
Our title refers to something that the National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster said. accused of North Korea of having exercising provocative and destabilizing behavior. But couldn't the same be said about U.S. moving to what Trump called an armada of ships up to North Korea's border? Is that not provocative? Is not potentially destabilizing?
Which are being followed by what, Chinese vessels, or the Russians are following it. Everybody knows what's going on.
Big party.
Actually, aircraft carriers and this sort of thing, if there was a modern day war, those are still World War II type weapons. Missiles can destroy them within minutes, but they're surface vessels. But it's there for show. It's there for spending money. It's there for a transfer of wealth from the middle class. But you got to keep people fearful. Keep the people scared to death, and tell them if they don't do it, they're unpatriotic, or they're against the military, and they're against freedom and against the Constitution. If you don't go along with this, the wars in the Middle East, how many times did we hear this stuff? Oh, we have to go there and send these young kids over there to get killed and wounded to protect our Constitution and protect our liberties. Why do people buy into that? To fight an unconstitutional war and stay for 15 years, keep losing and never knowing what the goal is, and having total lack of success. And they say, we're protecting freedom, we're protecting liberty. Everybody that goes over there and shoots and kills, they're our heroes. It's so far removed from reality on what the world should be doing. You say, they might say, Ron, you just don't even want any national defense. No, I want defense. Yeah. I don't want this offense that makes us endangered and makes the whole world hate us and spread us into all these other countries. I was thinking the other day, we all know that we have troops in a lot of countries, and some are small numbers, but 140, 150, depends on how you count them. We have troops all over the place. And I got to thinking, are we the only imperialistic nation? How many other countries, if you took China and Russia, the Europeans, how many of those people have troops to the size that we have in all these other countries? I think they have token troops when they could put him under NATO or something like this, but it's very, very little compared to what we do.
And the expense of having these troops everywhere, in the multi-billions. Here's what the great humanitarians, I guess, in the U.S. want. They want China to embargo oil to North Korea. That's what they think is going to bring the country to its knees. North Korea gets about 90% of its oil from China. But what's going to happen, this is what you've always said about embargoes, what's going to happen to the average North Korean who probably hates his government as much as a lot of us do? If all of a sudden 90% of the oil's cut off, it's not going to hurt the elites. It's not going to hurt the top Communist Party officials. It's going to make a bad life even worse for the average guy. Is he going to thank America for this?
And just think of all those years we had the sanctions on Cuba. To punish Castro, and then the people would overthrow him. Well, Castro stayed in power, the people suffered, and it went on for 50 years, and it's barely breaking free from that. But no sanction, and I'm convinced that it's accurate to say sanctions are an act of war. This is the first thing you do. You boycott, you blockade, you deny individuals, the countries to get anything if you're in a time of war. So this is, but we do it all the time. Not only do we put sanctions on where they can't, import and sell, we freeze all their assets. Just think of the billions of dollars that we froze back in the 50s. And then when it was trying to work out under Obama, they gave the Iranians some of their money back, and they called it an American subsidy to them. And right now, the Iranians are buying stuff from us. There's a little bit of trade going on, and the government seems to be somewhat tolerant compared to some other governments, since there were news stories out this weekend that the Christians were allowed, to express themselves in Christian ceremonies, which is not done. That certainly isn't the case in some of the countries we rescued, and took over their country and gave them a new government. That's where the killing is going on, and killing the Christians.
Exactly. I just read a great article by Stephen Kinzer, who we both read and admire. He was in Cuba. It's funny you mentioned that. He was in Cuba, and I think he said something like 50% of Cubans now are involved in private enterprise.
Wow.
Since this whole embargo thing has has eased up quite a bit. He said they're just running to open small businesses, little shops, and so that is much more productive.
I think of that. Well, how did they learn that so quickly? The rules and regulations were changed, and all of a sudden, I think they continue it because there's always an underground economy. It used to be every hidden. I bet you there was trading going on and black markets or the real market. So it's just opened up. I think it's the nature of people. I mean, if you read old history, ancient history, there was trading going on for thousands of years, and they knew something about sound money, so it's very natural to do that. So it's not a giant leap to go from an authoritarian government to people knowing, understand how to run their own businesses. It's just that there'll be so much more wealth once they get rid of that type of authoritarianism. And that, of course, is what we were promised with our president. And it remains to be seen, because right now the wealth looks like it's going to be used to build more weapons. It's going to be used to build walls. It's going to be used to rebuild highways. And it's go on and on. But the people are going to end up with more debt, and the financial crisis is going to continue to build. So whether it's foreign policy or the domestic policy or Fed policy, all these things contribute to the undermining of the liberties of the people, as well as undermining, the prosperity of the people.
Exactly, and wouldn't this work so much better than bombs on North Korea, to somehow find a way to encourage a free market, encourage exchange with South Korea? I think it would be like Cuba. A lot of people say this is like the Cuban Missile Crisis we're watching right now with North Korea. Why couldn't it be solved rather than wasting decades with sanctions of the way we're seeing Cuba being solved now, as Kinzer writes about?
Well, that sounds like a very good idea. I hope they're listening, and I hope Trump calls you today, Daniel, and ask you for them to get that advice. And I think there would be some in the current administration that would pay a little bit of attention to the economic policy we talk about. Whether they come about or not, it's another story. But for some reason, the views of non-interventionism seems to be something totally forgotten and ignored, because we were hoping for less intervention overseas. And right now, it looks like it's accelerating. I mean, and this whole idea that we have to show our strength and be tough, and we have to surprise everybody, and we have to not tip off anybody. Yeah. How about tipping off the Congress? And how about tipping off the American people who have to pay for it? And what about an explanation on who the great destabilizers are? But if we're honest with ourselves, we would have to admit that the policies of the United States government for the past several decades or longer has been destabilizing in the world, and the American people have generally gone along with it because they have been taught that we have to police the world, and we're for American exceptionalism. But less people are believing that. More people are starting to realize that there is a true cost, and there's a lot of people right now that are questioning this bombing and quick response in a military way, this kinetic military response. Well, we're voting today against that kinetic military response. We're still arguing the case that maybe we ought to indirectly or directly talk with people. If we did it with Stalin and Khrushchev and others, I would think that it's a possibility that somebody who is totally inept, inefficient, does not have a nuclear bomb, he can't even turn streetlights on at nighttime. We shouldn't be so terrified and intimidated that we're willing to drive the world into war. That makes no sense whatsoever. So that's what I argue for, is some common sense when it comes to foreign policy before the economic crash forces us into it. Unfortunately, if I had to bet, I'd bet we're going to have the financial crisis before we had come to sanity in Washington with a sensible foreign policy. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.